Hello Tony.
Hey, how are you going?
Good, good. Thanks for joining us on Owner Drive today.
No worries, thank you.
Very excited to learn about the car you've got here, the Tesla Model 3.
Yep.
Otherwise known as Merlin by the looks. But what was the inspiration for the number plate?
So Merlin came about for a few reasons. One is the rocket engines on the bottom of the SpaceX rockets are called Merlin engines.
Sure.
And because Merlin goes like a rocket, he had to be named after a rocket. But it's also magical to drive. So.
Yeah, oh great, great. That's a very good number plate for it. Now can you talk us through what made you take the leap to a Tesla? So I know the uptake in Australia has been a lot less than in say European or countries or the US. What made you take that leap?
Well, I had a diesel car before this one, and the running costs of it were getting quite high. The fuel costs were high. I was sick of paying the man all the time, every time I pulled up at a service station, and I sort of wanted to think about something different, and I was looking at a hybrid, but my son was very keen on Elon Musk and all things Tesla, and he said, oh, you should take one for a drive. And I must admit I was a bit skeptical. I didn't know how far you could go between charges and all of that, and how long the batteries would last. But after I took one for a test drive, I had to have one.
Well, first of all, can we have a look sort of under the bonnet and within the car and see what's there?
So everything in the car is driven when you're out of the car by an app, and so I can open the front bonnet, and in Tesla language, that's the front trunk or the frunk. Okay. If you're in the UK, it's the boot. Yeah, because it's the front boot, but we call it the frunk. So here, this is the frunk at the moment, and I've just got a couple of things in there. I've got to do some drop-offs later, but basically the motor itself for the front motor, and this is a long-range version, so it's got two motors, a smaller motor at the front and then a larger motor at the rear. And the motor sits underneath this, and then sort of behind this point here above the motor is all the AC and power steering and all of that.
Oh, okay. So you do see some of the traditional things you'd see in another car in behind here.
Yes, yes.
So this would come away, would it?
Yeah, so this comes out, and then you can do your servicing down here. There's a 12-volt battery, so the 12-volt battery does, you know, like your door openings and the boot release and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, the only thing that you have to service on the car is that little cap there to put some windscreen washer fluid in. There's no other servicing on the car. There's no oil to change. There's no other fluids or whatever. I think there is brake fluid, obviously, but you hardly ever use the brakes, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So yeah, there's just no... There's very little to service on the vehicle when you're going.
So is that a standard lead acid battery that they still need in addition to the lithium batteries? Oh, that's interesting.
What happens at night, the car goes to sleep if it's not being charged. And when it goes to sleep, basically the high voltage connectors open and that battery becomes isolated, and then the car goes into a deep sleep, and so you don't lose much charge then out of it.
I see, excellent. And the brakes, I imagine, so it would still be a standard hydraulic setup?
Yeah. So it's still power brakes, and you can see the front calipers there just on the wheels. So,
but then they are used for regeneration, aren't they?
No, the motors are used for regeneration.
Oh,
so the motors themselves slow you down. So this, when you're driving it, is pretty much 1 foot driving nearly all the time. Yeah. It'd be very rare to use the brake. You might use it if you misjudge when you take your foot off the accelerator and so on, but it's a completely different driving experience by driving with one pedal.
Can you walk me through the rest of the exterior? So this is a traditional boot out back?
Yeah. So this boot here, it's manual at the moment, but you can get a power lift, but it's quite long, and then there's no spare tyre with the car, so that area there is all available in a sort of wheel well if you want. But it's interesting that I think a lot of times now European cars aren't delivered with spare tyres. And you know, I was a bit surprised that this didn't even come with a space saver, but obviously it saves weight as well, so I suppose that's why they do it. I have bought a spare wheel, so when we go on a long drive I'll probably take it, but I've also got compressors and wheel repair kits as well here.
Okay, so you're pretty well set up. So say, what does Tesla expect you to do ordinarily if you get a flat tyre?
Yeah, their view is that you should call their roadside assist, and the roadside assist will be able to come to you. But I also have RACQ roadside assist, so I don't know if I'd trust a company based in Fremont in California to come and rescue me when I'm out back of Queensland.
Absolutely. So you haven't had to call on their services at all?
No. But to be honest, we can talk about the servicing with Tesla later, because there is a bit of concern about their reliability, etc., and servicing when you take your car in for service. But I've found them to be excellent. So.
Okay. How about this roof here? So this is fully glass up top?
Yeah, so it's fully glass all the way, right from here right through to the front bonnet. So
does it open up at all, or?
No. So it's fixed, and again, that was something that was interesting for me, is that safe, and actually it's stronger than a metal roof. Obviously, it doesn't have as much give, but it actually adds a lot to the structural stability of the car.
So it could take a few hits, because things do drop on your roof sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not going to be cracking on you or anything like that.
No. Some people have had cracked windscreens and cracked roofs. In that hailstorm in Canberra a couple of years ago, there was a couple with smashed roofs, but most of the time it's been fine. Maybe if your hail's about cricket balls bigger, then you might be in trouble, but an ordinary car would be too. So.
Okay, and what about the heat? Does the sun tend to go in there and heat things up?
No, it's very heavily tinted, and that was again in Queensland weather. Something I was concerned about. I've got a sunshade for it, and when we go on long drives, I might put it up just because of the glare more than anything. But even so, with it so heavily tinted, you don't usually worry. What you do find is you can feel the heat, but it's only about that far from the roof, so it doesn't tend to warm the whole car up.
The charge port, you're mentioning that to me.
Yeah. So again, if the car's unlocked, you can open it quite easily, or again from the app, if we open up the charge port here.
So where are we? There it is.
Yeah, so and basically it's what's called a CCS port, a type 2, which is the top plug, and then a fast DC plug. These are sometimes called Manneka's sockets, and they're very standard now across Australia. So every charger you go to pretty much has a type 2 plug now. The older, smaller type 1s are pretty much disappearing, but the type 2s are everywhere. The bottom 2 pins are actually for DC fast charging. So when I go to a Tesla supercharger, or in Queensland, there's a Queensland Electric Superhighway right up through to Cairns, it plugs in to both ports but charges through the DC port. And like charging this up at a Tesla supercharger, the longest is probably about 40 minutes, from maybe 20% to full. So it charges relatively quickly. It's still obviously longer than a petrol car though.
So still have a bit of a break before you continue on, I guess.
Well, that's the way. We drove to Townsville at Christmas time, and then last week to Bundaberg. I went to Tamworth a couple of weeks ago, and I find that after about 2 hours, I need to stop either to go to the loo or just to walk around. And if you plan it, and the car can plan it, or there's apps to plan it, just stop, plug the car in, go and have a cup of tea, come back, car's charged, ready to go on for the next step.
So it sounds like you've made a few longer trips.
Yep.
I think that's a concern for a lot of people in Australia, given the fast distances people need to cover. So you've always been able to find chargers to make these trips?
Yeah. So there's a number of apps around for electric vehicle owners. One called a Better Route Planner, which is really useful to go on long drives, and it shows you where a lot of the charging stations are. But it also plans out your route as well. So it'll say you can stop here for 20 minutes, stop there for 10. With an electric vehicle, you don't drive it from full to empty. You basically drive it to your next charger, or maybe the one after that. But if you charge when you get the opportunity, you're only charging for 10 to 20 minutes each time, and it's a lot quicker that way.
So would there ever be a scenario, I guess, where you'd be caught out with a flat battery, and what would you do?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit like a car, a petrol, what we call an ICE vehicle, an internally combusted engine vehicle. Do you run out of petrol like that? You know, it's very rare that you run out of petrol. So you tend to look for, oh, where's there going to be a petrol station? Well, here it's where's the next charger going to be? The other thing on long drives is the car tells you how it's going, and there's a really useful display on there that says, okay, this is where you're starting, this is where you plan to get to, and this is how you're going with your charge. And it shows you your consumption. So if you get a headwind, if you get a lot of rain, if it's really hot and you're using the AC, it'll show you that maybe you're going a bit too hard and you might need to back off a bit on your acceleration or your speed. So consumption in one of these is about speed. It's about how you drive it. It's about all of the accessories you have on. So the less of those you have on, or the less fast you drive, the more efficient you'll be.
Tony, so it sounds like you've been pretty happy with the availability of ports and chargers.
Yep.
On your trips. How about in the home? How do people charge their cars?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. The way I've set it up at home is we've got solar panels on the roof. They're only 3.5 kilowatts. We've had them for a while, and we have a high performance wall charger on the house, and I plug in through there. That gives us between 25 and 32 amps, just depending on how you switch it. You do have to be cautious though, because we got ours installed by an electrician, and the total demand on your house becomes important. So if you have a big air conditioner like we do and a big hot water system like we do, ovens and so on, you can actually exceed the line current coming in, and so you need a professional electrician to install them. I get 25 amps regularly on mine, and that takes about 8 hours to charge the car fully.
And that setup, the costs involved initially, does Tesla cover any of that, or are you sort of out of pocket?
So they supplied the wall charger. They don't do that anymore because not many people, not everybody needs a high performance wall charger. Maybe they'll just plug in, the Tesla comes with a slow charger, which you can plug in through a normal 12 amp or 15 amp socket, and it will charge the car at a slower speed, but it'll still charge it adequately.
Okay. Would it do it overnight? Is that
yes?
Is that the theory? Okay.
Yeah. But it does. It's a much slower prospect, and so using that, if you just plugged into a normal 240 volt charger, you'd get about 10 kilometres an hour of charge, and so the car has about 500 kilometres of range. So totally charging it up from empty would be about 50 hours.
Okay, well that's longer than I thought.
Yeah.
Whereas the fast charger, how long does that take?
It's about 8 hours.
8 hours overnight. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's talk performance. So I'm very interested to know how these things go. I've driven a Model S, and it blew my mind really about how smooth, quiet, and fast it was. How does the Model 3 compare for you?
It's such a transformation compared to previous cars I've driven. I was lucky a few years ago that a friend of mine lent me his Porsche Boxster for a few months to drive while he was overseas. He wanted somebody just to keep it going and turn it over and so on. And that taught me what it's not like to drive a nice car. One of my favourite drives is just near here, up over Mount Mee. It's a magical windy drive, and so I'd driven the Porsche over that, and I knew what it was like to take a nice car over this. This is just as good. Different, but just as good. The Porsche is very quick and very light. This is 1.8 tonnes because of the weight of the battery. So you feel the weight, but the acceleration of this car is unbelievable, and it's always there. So when you're driving on mountain roads, punching out of a corner is where you really get the exhilaration, and you can throw this car around really well as well. So
the batteries, where do they sit? Are they in the sort of in the middle there somewhere?
No,
Are
the
they at the
battery's
front or the back?
right under the floor. So under the whole floor from just behind the front wheel arch to just in front of the back wheel arch.
Okay, so there's like a layer of batteries underneath you.
There's 2,600 and something batteries sitting under there. They're all about the size of a, between a C and a D cell. They're a bit bigger and a bit taller. But those cells are all laid flat, and they're laid in an undulating pattern through the cooling network. So basically the batteries and the cooling system are all one unit, if you like.
There you go. So I guess in terms of longevity, is that something that they ever need to service, or is the idea that it's sealed up and you forget about it for a period of time?
So I think on these cars, the batteries are warranted for 8 years or 500,000 kilometres. But there's people that have driven 2 million kilometres in Model 3s now. There's a guy in Norway who's driven his car forever, and he's had 2 battery packs in his 2 million years, so 2 million kilometres.
So they can swap them out?
Yeah, originally the intent was you could just drop the batteries out of the car and you would be able to drive into a service station and swap battery packs in about 5 minutes. That hasn't come to be because of all the charging stations and the convenience of charging.
Tony, I want to talk about range. I think this would be one of the biggest questions people have.
Yep.
What sort of range can you expect on average? You know, it's very, very different to a petrol car, I guess, where we're talking litres per 100 in terms of economy. How far can you get on a charge? Yeah,
so from 100 to 0 is probably about 500 kilometres. So it's interesting, there's a lot of debate around the ranges that are quoted, because if you go on their website, they say 620 k's for one of these. That's an EPA stated range, which in Australia and in the US they have to use. It's much less than that in real life. You know, if you drove the car at 60 kilometres an hour, you could go probably even further than 600 kilometres. But that's not how you drive normally. And it's just like fuel consumption on a petrol vehicle.
Oh, they're always overstating those as well, aren't they? So that's no different there. Yeah. So talk me through, say we've got a 1,000-kilometre trip up north to near Townsville somewhere. Yep. What are the costs likely to be? Can you break that down for us? Yeah,
so I drove this car to Townsville at Christmas time, and all up it was, I think driving there cost me $25. In Queensland there is a few Tesla superchargers. I think there's four or five now but they're mostly in southeast Queensland. When you buy a Tesla, if you know somebody who's already got one, you can get a referral code, and that gives you 1,500 kilometres of free supercharging. And I had that to start with because an Uber driver who took me home one day had a Tesla Model S, and so I used his referral charge, so we both got our 1,500 k's. Recently, a friend of mine bought one, and I got 1,500 k's from referring them. And when we were driving home at Christmas, I used the supercharger at Gympie, topped up there, but then I was on what's called the Queensland Electric Superhighway. That's a network of chargers all the way up the coast to Cairns, and there's, I think, a couple going out west as well. Each time I charged there was about $8, and I'd charge every 200 to 300 kilometres on the way up, mostly because that's as far as I wanted to drive before I wanted to brake, not because I had to.
So a full charge to get you that 500 kilometres or thereabouts, how much does that cost?
So if I was charging at home on a mix of solar and line power, I reckon it'd probably cost me about $8 to $10 in electricity cost.
And then on the open road at a charging station?
Yeah, so if you use the Tesla ones, or there's EV high capacity or high current chargers, they're about 60 cents a kilowatt hour. This is a 75 kilowatt battery. So if you were charging from empty, you'd probably be looking at about $40 to fill the tank, if you like.
Okay. And you'd have to do that, say, twice to get up to Townsville.
Yeah.
So you're still coming well under a petrol car, most petrol cars, aren't you?
Yeah, and the other chargers, the Queensland Electric Superhighway chargers, they're only 20 cents a kilowatt hour. And so they're much, much cheaper, but they're slower. the EV charger at on the sunny coast does 350 kilowatts. 350 kilowatts, whereas most of the ones put in with the state government and local councils, they're 50 kilowatts. You can't use 350 kilowatts to charge this car. You could probably use about 150 max. So.
And that's superhighway.
Yeah.
So does that run up and down the Australian coast?
It only in Queensland. Once you get south of here, there's Tesla superchargers pretty much all the way, as well as NMRA chargers. And we're going to drive this car to Adelaide in August, September, and we'll use the Tesla superchargers and the NMRA chargers all the way.
So it's not just the eastern seaboard, they are spreading west as well.
Yep.
So you could, in theory, get yourself across to Perth?
Yes, you can. There's just a bit of a gap at the moment on the Nullarbor where you need to stop and charge overnight because there's not the high-speed chargers there. But even in 2012, when the Model S came out, people drove around Australia in them because you can charge anywhere there's a 240 volt or 415 three-phase outlet. You can charge your car on one of those.
Absolutely. So that standard charger, you can take that along with you.
Yeah.
So if you're ever stuck, you can, in theory, just use a normal power.
That's right. I've got it in the boot all the time. So Tesla has one party trick. A Model 3 has one party trick, and it has it all the time.
Oh! Wow!
And so that acceleration with the electric motors is always there. And so when you're on a road, it's really useful for overtaking. It's also really, every gap's a Tesla gap, I say, like every gap in the traffic is something that you can easily fit into. And in some ways I think that's safe, but in other ways I've found people aren't expecting it. So if you're merging and you see a spot up front and you accelerate, somebody could actually move over in front of you in the time that you've already accelerated into the same spot.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, that was off the mark. In the wet too. So would it have factored in the slippery road?
Yep. And so even in the rain, with that, I can give it enough accelerator, and because of the traction control, it doesn't slip, I think the dual motors on this is quick. The Performance, which is the next model up from this, does 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds. This one does it in 4 seconds, or just over 4 seconds now. And you can buy an acceleration upgrade as well that takes you even faster.
Tony, talk us through some of the other costs. So you did explain to us, the recharging and the costs associated with that. What about the upfront cost? Do you mind me asking? What did it set you back?
Yeah, so I think the list price is in the order of $87,000 on the website, and then by the time you put on stamp duty and registration and on-road costs, it ended up being $93,000 on the road.
On the road.
Yeah. So they're not cheap. They're not cheap at all.
I guess nice. But any haggling? Can you make them move at all?
No,
Tesla?
No. Tesla is a bit like Apple in that you only there's one price, and that price is the same for everybody.
Okay.
So.
And what about servicing? I mean, I know there's not servicing in the traditional sense, but did Tesla want you to take the car back to them at all?
They suggest you do it once every 2 years or so, but there's no set servicing on this car. Basically, there is no real servicing on one of these cars because there's so little mechanical components to the car. Obviously, the electric motors and the drivetrain, but they're separate front and back. You'll notice there's no differential and tail shaft tunnel all the way through the car.
No, there's not,
Yeah, and so the lack of servicing in this is a big selling point for me. I didn't have to keep paying every 6 months or so. It's just take it in. The thing that they usually do is replace the air filter. They might look or rotate your tyres, but that's about it.
Okay. Do they have a logbook or a checklist they work
No.
off as such or not?
Oh,
No.
actually, yes, sorry, they do. that checklist is in the manual, and they publish that so you can do all your own servicing as well. So the idea, I think, that Tesla brought out is that basically you have the right to repair this or service it as you see fit.
Did you get a warranty with the Tesla?
Yeah, so the standard warranty on the car, I think it's 4 years and 80,000 kilometres, if I remember rightly. And the drivetrain, I think, and the batteries are 8 years or 500,000. Now we're on this road, and this road's a bit windy, but I'll put on autopilot, so now the car is driving itself, and legally I've got to have my hand on the wheel.
Okay.
But the car is now doing its own steering. It'll detect that vehicle there.
You're controlling the throttle?
No, it's doing everything.
Oh, so you set your speed?
I've set it to speed to the speed limit, and so now as it's going down, it'll hold that speed, it'll regen. It's saying, see, apply slight turning pressure to the wheel, but that's all doing it by itself now. So now this is a bit of a windy road. I'm not entirely convinced about how well it corners on really tight corners, but it slowed us down a little bit on that last one.
Does it? I guess it does see the corner coming.
It sees about 300 to 400 metres in front of it. So, you know, obviously coming up to a T intersection, I wouldn't trust it to go through a T intersection by itself. But yeah, even that was a Tesla gap. You know, that was something you could easily get into. But I think the other thing is you've got to be careful of not being an arrogant driver on the road as well when you have something like this. The car, when you buy it, comes with premium connectivity, and that means that it's connected to 4G network or a cellular network the whole time. After 12 months, you've got to pay for that separately, but that gives you access to YouTube, Spotify, the live traffic, all of that sort of stuff that you wouldn't normally get access to otherwise.
And what's the cost for that one?
I think it's $9 a month.
Okay. Oh, that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And that uses the standard mobile network in Australia, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Tony, can we talk safety? Is the Tesla a safe car in your opinion? You know, I think about lithium batteries and the potential for explosiveness. You know, isn't explosive? Is it a safe car? What rating does it get?
It's a 5-star ANCAP. It's actually one of the safest cars on the road for a number of reasons. Look, there's a lot of concern about batteries and fires. There's more fires in ICE vehicles, petrol vehicles, than there are in any electric vehicles. There has been a couple of electric vehicles caught fire, mostly because of charging, but I haven't seen that in a Tesla. In terms of safety, the thing about this car is because you've got no motor up front, you've got a much bigger crumple zone. The crumple zone goes all the way back, but also then in terms of passive safety, you've got airbags all the way around. The roof itself, even though it's glass, is much stronger than a metal roof. You can sit 3 elephants on it apparently, and it won't break. And then after the passive safety, you've got the active safety, and that's traction control, which most cars have, ABS, etc. But also the software. This car has 5 cameras around it running all the time. And if a car moves into your lane, the car will tell you and it will move. It will apply emergency steering. It will tell you it's going to do it. If a car stops in front of you, the car will warn you there's a car stopping in front of you, or even the car in front of that. Because it's got a radar in the front, it can actually bounce that radar under the car immediately in front of you and see the car in front as well. Impressive. So in terms of safety, in the US, they have a report around accidents per 100,000 kilometres. Tesla Model 3s, with all of the safety working and it driving itself, there's 1 crash every 3.5 million kilometres. The average in the US is 1 crash every 300,000 kilometres. So with all of that active safety, and if you're using its autopilot or even its full self-driving features, it's really, really safe. Even when you're driving yourself, it's still about one incident every 1.5 million kilometres. So,
Great. It sounds like a very safe car.
yeah.
Now that moves on to my next question, the autonomous driving.
Yes.
So I did give that a whirl.
Yes.
It has made the press, a couple of people crashing,
Yes.
having that on and not paying attention.
Yes.
So the recommendation from Tesla is you still need to be paying attention, don't you?
It is full self-driving and it is autonomous, but in Australia, you'll legally have to be in control of the vehicle. And the way Tesla does this is you've got to have the hand on the steering wheel and applying pressure. If you don't, after about 30 seconds, it will say, please apply pressure. If you don't, the car will eventually slow down and pull off the road. So if you fell asleep at the wheel in 30 seconds, the car will stop and pull off. But it is really great having the, in this car I don't have full self-driving, I just have the autopilot or auto steer, but it's so great on the highway, and it really makes for relaxing driving. You just click it on, the car follows the road, and you've got one hand resting on the wheel, and you can look around, see what's going on, and it's not anywhere near as tiring.
Yeah, I did. When we took the Model S for a drive, we had it on. It did get confused over train tracks.
Oh, okay.
That threw it.
Yeah.
Because I guess it didn't have the lines to follow.
So it will only work where there's a centre line. If there's no centre line, it will either not let you engage it or it'll tell you to take control if it is on.
That's what it did, yeah. It told you to take back control and we're going over a couple of lines of train tracks.
Yeah. I tend to use it mostly on the major roads, whether they're 60k or 100k, but on suburban streets, it's okay, but I'd rather, the things happen too quickly. I'd rather be in control then. And I enjoy driving, so I want to drive it.
Have you had any issues at all across the board with the Tesla?
The only thing, I had a rock stuck in the brake caliper that made a clicking noise, and mobile service came out to fix that. I got a crack in the windscreen driving back from Townsville. A rock came up from a four-wheel drive, and I had to get the windscreen replaced. And that was all done under insurance. The only other issues, there's a couple of minor paint defects, which I noticed, and a panel gap that I got them to realign, which they did well under warranty.
Tesla sorted that out for you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, these American-built cars, I don't think quite have the same build quality as the Japanese and Korean-built cars. The new made in China ones are just coming out now, and they seem to have better build quality. And yeah, we'll see. Germany's starting manufacture soon too.
All right. Now, I know the Model 3, I guess, was Tesla's attempt at becoming more mainstream.
Yep.
So the sticker price is still fairly high,
yep,
out of reach of a lot of people. But it's $92,000, wasn't it, on road?
93, yeah.
93. Would you say it was money well spent?
Yeah, I asked myself that, and my wife asked me a lot too. I think, for the technology you buy, for the, the running costs, which are fairly minimal, obviously cost to charge it, and but no servicing costs per se, I think it's pretty worthwhile. And I'll be interested over a 5-year period whether it comes out equivalent to like a Toyota Camry or something along those lines, which some people suggest it does.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Toyota Camry, but I think, this really needs to be compared to a more premium car, a BMW, or from the likes of Mercedes as well. So I think, when you're talking those brands, the pricing becomes a lot more attractive. And, I was certainly impressed with the drive today.
Yeah. No.
So in terms of, give us three key items that you would say encourage people to buy a Tesla, to make that leap into a Tesla.
Yeah, for me, not having to worry about the petrol price as you drive past the service station, the technology in the car, and its safety are the three big things for me.
Yeah, and that go.
And that go.
That acceleration.
That acceleration that's always there, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, well, how about giving us a score out of 10?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this when I watched your other videos, and look, I wouldn't like to say it's perfect, but for me, I won't ever go away now from probably another Tesla or another electric vehicle, and it does everything that I expected. So I'd say it's, for me, an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10.
Right up there. Anything that could be improved upon?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. The car keeps improving. The software gets updated over the air, and so you don't have to wait much for those things you thought you might need, and for a lot of things you don't, like fart mode, for example.
Yeah.
But I think it's continually improving. I haven't found anything that said, oh, I wish it had this,
Cool. All right, Tony. Well, I've been thoroughly impressed. Thank you very much for your time today.
No problem.
And I'm sure our viewers got a lot out of it as well as I have. So thanks again.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in for another episode of Owner Drive. I really enjoyed the time with Tony today. The Tesla Model 3 is a car I had a lot of questions about, and I do feel that our viewers would as well. So I found today really informative. Tony's obviously a very happy owner, and he's made that leap into a Tesla. And I think today's review would certainly encourage other people to do so as well. So guys, if you found this useful, we can really do with your support. Please click like and subscribe, and don't forget that notification button as well. Until next time.